I'm Robert with Knowmium, and we're taking a look at managing virtual meetings. What can we do to organize and plan for virtual meetings, and what can we do to facilitate and run better virtual meetings? A lot of the content in this video will apply to physical meetings when we meet face-to-face, but our focus is virtually online meetings. Why is this so important? Well, Atlassian published some statistics about meetings in general. Yes, it includes physical meetings. What they found when they were surveying business people was that some business people said 50% of the time they spent in meetings was simply wasted. Either half the meetings they went to, they didn't need to be at, or they were in these long meetings and half the time they were there simply wasn't productive. Some employees said that up to 31 hours every single month was wasted in unproductive meetings. Now, most people don't have a statistic that is that high, but this shows the severity of the problem with wasted time. When we are working remotely, when we have people working from home in different locations and different offices, and we're having virtual meetings, there's a common trend that because we're connected to our computers and our devices, we can have more meetings and everybody can be there because, hey, we're already at a device that can connect to the meeting, but that doesn't make it a good idea. So in this video, we're going to cover 6 topics: getting our objectives for the meeting, setting and using an agenda, figuring out attendees, who needs to be there and what do they need to do, how can we create interaction in meetings, having presence with voice, body language, and visuals, and what can we do after the meeting to follow up. So number 1, objectives. First, ask yourself, what are your goals for the upcoming meeting? Write them down or type them somewhere. If you can't make a list of objectives for your meeting that you're running, spend more time planning or consider not having a meeting at all. Specifically ask yourself and write down, what do you want the attendees to do during the meeting? And especially, what do you want them to do after the meeting? How can the meeting attendees use the information that they're hearing in this meeting? How can they use it later on the job? If you can't answer that question, consider not having a meeting. And there are alternatives to having a live meeting. So think about a physical meeting or a virtual meeting. Everybody has to stop what they're doing. They have to come into the boardroom or they have to log on, and they're all there at the same time. And that has benefits when we want interaction and we want discussion and we want ideas and conversation. But if it's a one-way stream of information, if I just need to talk for 10 minutes, maybe I should be sending an email. Maybe it has some links or a PDF for people to read, or maybe I can make a video like this one that people can watch on their own time and they can get the information they need. And if they have questions, they can follow up over email or in a private phone call. Number 2, agendas. There are great meetings that are impromptu, that don't have an agenda. We just kind of wing it and we just talk freely. Those can be great, they can be collaborative, but they can also be seen as unproductive, especially if the meeting leader or the attendees are veering off of track and it's just taking too long to conclude the meeting and to get some relevant discussion. So meeting agendas definitely help the organizer and the meeting leader stay organized and on schedule and on topic, and it helps those attendees also follow along and stay on topic when the meeting's happening. Now, Harvard Business Review published an article, and it had 2 great takeaways. One takeaway was that having an agenda doesn't automatically help. Only relevant agendas help. Is the agenda in the meeting relevant to the people who are in that meeting? So for example, if we have a meeting about accounting, but the marketing people are there. If the marketing people don't feel like the agenda and the meeting topics are relevant, that agenda doesn't do anything for them. The other thing that the Harvard Business Review said was that agendas can show leadership for the rest of the team. When the leaders use the agenda to facilitate discussion, when they use the agenda to facilitate conversation to get other people's opinions. So they're not just using it as bullet points in a one-way speech. They are using agenda points to get other people's interactions, ideas, and input. When we are scheduling agendas and we're working out the timeline of a meeting, we may want to build in flex time when the meeting is virtual for 3 reasons. First of all, we can build in 5 or 10 minutes for small talk. When we are working in remote locations, we may not be talking to our fellow colleagues as much. We don't have as many lunches together. We don't have a physical meeting room to go into where we have conversations. How was your weekend? How's your family? And building that into a virtual meeting is a great idea to keep employee and personal relations going. Also, giving flex time in a meeting, especially virtual meetings, helps to facilitate discussion, letting people know we have time built in for your questions and your ideas. And the other reason we might want a little bit more flex time is just for tech lag. People have trouble connecting, people take a while to come off of mute. So if we have a 1-hour meeting that's face-to-face, we may want to schedule that meeting to be 1 hour and 15 minutes virtually for those 3 reasons: chit-chat, small talk, discussion, and tech lag. Now, let's think about the attendees. Who really needs to be in our meeting? It's, like I said, it's really common to say we have all these employees and they're all at their computers, they're working remotely. Let's just have everyone dial in at the same time, but that's stopping their actual productivity and it may be interrupting their processes and their personal tasks. So think carefully who needs to be in that meeting, and let's look at some numbers. Let's say we have a team of 10 employees and every day there's a 30-minute meeting. Well, collectively, that's 5 hours of productivity that people are spending in the meeting. And if the meeting is 30 minutes and it's a productive meeting with a wonderful agenda that's relevant to those people, that's excellent. That's 5 hours well spent. But let's imagine we shortened it. We didn't need to be in the meeting for 30 minutes. We only needed to be in that daily meeting 20 minutes. Well, what happens? At the end of the year, we've saved 416 hours. That's a little bit more than 10 work weeks for everyone combined. And if we have 10 employees, that means that if all those employees saved 10 minutes a day, at the end of the year, they'd have 1 extra week of time that they didn't spend in the meeting. Now, the goal is not always shortening meetings, though. It's not just reducing the time. The goal can be maximizing the time we're in there. So if we keep our meetings at 30 minutes, but we make 10 minutes of that every single day more productive and more relevant, that is more hours collectively that people are productive, and we're not losing 1 week of time for every single employee. So, some steps with agendas. First, decide who should attend and when. If we have a 2-hour meeting or a 2-hour online event, we may only need the marketing team to be there for the first 30 minutes. Don't make them stay for the last hour and a half if it's not relevant to them. Number 2, send the agenda to the attendees and let them know expectations. Do you want them to be on video? Will they need to speak? You may want to talk to specific people or specific departments and let them know what they need to be prepared to discuss and bring to that meeting. You, the facilitator, can prepare your content and your talking points. And if you've asked people to bring in information or bring in their ideas, they can start preparing as well. Finally, when you're sending out that agenda to the attendees, you may want to mention if the meeting is going to be recorded. You may want to mention where that recording is going to go. Is it only going to be for the attendees? Is it going to go to other departments or other people who weren't in that meeting? And there may be some other ethical concerns that you have or that your company wants you to include. Number 4, interacting during meetings. So I mentioned previously, we could send an email, we could make a video. If you're going to have only one-way information, consider not having a meeting. But really productive meetings get people involved and they are interactive. The American Psychology Association said that when people are multitasking, maybe they're just working at home on their own, they're not in a meeting, but they're multitasking, it can lower their productivity by up to 40%. And that's a lot. At the end of the week or at the end of the year, losing 40% of your productivity time, nobody wants that. So when we're in a virtual meeting, It's really easy to check our phone. It's really easy to read the news. It's really easy to multitask and email some of our clients. And people will do that if the meeting's not relevant to them or if it's not interactive. So our suggestion is interact with your attendees every 5 or 10 minutes. Ask them to do something. Here we have a physical meeting. Somebody on stage is asking the people to raise their hand. They're answering a question by raising their hand. You could do that in a video meeting. If people are on video, ask them to raise their hand, but there's other ways that we can interact when we're meeting virtually. What we want to remember is that we're humans, and even if we're connecting virtually, we have human-to-human communication needs, and we want to recreate face-to-face communication as best we can virtually. One thing we can do is simply use people's names. Call people by name, ask them to speak, use their name, thank them by name. When we're asking people to speak, sometimes we can just ask for volunteers, but sometimes we point at people and they can feel like victims. Do we want volunteers or victims? Well, we don't want victims. So there are some things we can do to make people feel like they're not victims. We can call people by name, asking them to speak when they haven't spoken up, but we do that fairly, we do that equally, and we do that regularly. So when my colleagues come to my meetings, they know that at least once every single meeting they're being asked to speak. And if they haven't spoken, I'm going to call on them. And it gets people to be volunteers instead of victims. Also, I like to create a checklist of people who were in that meeting. When someone has spoken, I put a little check mark by their name, and towards the second half of the meeting, I start calling on people or asking people to speak who haven't talked yet. Or I'll at least ask them, do they have an opinion or any questions, giving them that chance to speak. And over time, people will know this isn't a listening-only webinar. It's an interactive, human-to-human meeting with human-to-human communication. When we're meeting virtually, we need to allow silence, not just for the tech lag that I mentioned earlier, but when we don't have the same level of eye contact in the meeting, you don't know who I'm looking at, even if I'm looking in the webcam. So I can call out my colleague Joshua to speak, and I can use his name, but if I just say to my team, who has an idea, nobody can look around. They're looking at the webcam, but they can't see who we're really looking at. So allow more silence for people to speak up, and of course allow more silence for people to come off of mute and to refocus their ideas. Now, discussion is great, but there's so many things that we can do in a virtual meeting that we might do in a physical meeting, but we can recreate these virtually. So think about the activities and the interactions and the tasks that you want your attendees to do. Some of these are built into a platform. So for example, most virtual meeting platforms have emojis and reactions. There might be a yes or no button that pops up. There might be a thumbs up or a thumbs down icon that appears on the screen. Every 5 or 10 minutes, ask people, if you're ready to move on, hit yes. If you agree, give us the thumbs up. Ask people to interact at some level to refocus their attention. Even better than reactions are messages in the chat box. Ask people to type their ideas, to type a word, to type a short sentence, to type an idea. Get them physically touching that keyboard to keep their focus in the meeting and, of course, to keep getting their ideas. A lot of meeting platforms have built-in whiteboards. We can type there, we can draw, we can put up slides and Excel files, and we can have people drawing and highlighting on those. Get people involved, give them something to do, and they will focus more in the meeting and they'll get more out of it. There's also a lot of websites and a lot of apps that we can use. There's online whiteboards that are outside of the platform that are much more extensive. They allow us to host PDFs and to host videos and to create workspaces where people are adding comments and ideas. There are a lot of other meeting apps that allow us to even play games and interact. And maybe playing games isn't the best word, but we could create an online quiz that people take on their phone that gets the meeting information across to them in an interactive way that's not just me speaking it. Number 5 is presence. So when we're meeting virtually, we have to get people's attention and we have to keep it. Or again, they'll just start multitasking. So yes, giving them something to do is great, but when you're speaking, how you look and how you sound on the screen is very important. So some things to consider. Imagine how somebody who's broadcasting on TV sounds. They aren't speaking to somebody face to face. They're not speaking at a friend who's eating dinner with them. They're speaking to an audience that they can't necessarily see. And even if we're meeting online and we can see people, we need to have a little bit more energy and emotion. This is true for our voice. Turn up the energy, turn up the emotion a little bit. Give people something to listen to that's attractive, that's entertaining. When we talk about voice with technology, everyone should be using a headset or some kind of microphone device that's not just built into their computer. If you've ever heard people get that echo effect where we can hear the sound coming in and out of their microphone and their computer speakers, it's very distracting. It doesn't sound great. So headsets are highly recommended, or at least having an external microphone. If you have a lot of meetings and you do a lot of presenting, you might want to consider downloading the app called Crisp. They have a free version, and the paid version is also very cheap. This reduces background noise for you and for your attendees. Moving on to body language, a couple of things to consider. Eye contact. As I mentioned, I can't look at specific people because I'm not in the same room with them. I can keep eye contact with the webcam, but I may need to call people by name for them to know who I want to interact with. We can also think about movement. Our head can move. Our facial expressions can move. Our hand gestures can move. Usually when I raise my hand, it's closer to my shoulder. It's almost off the screen, and I may need to bring it in a little bit closer. It may take a little bit of practice to get body language built into our meetings, especially if it's hand gestures, but we absolutely can build it in and give meaning to our gestures, our facial expressions, and our eye contact. Thinking about tech again. Getting a dedicated webcam that's at eye level is a great idea. Most laptops that have a built-in camera, it's not very good, it's not very clear, doesn't have a high resolution, so invest a little bit of money and get a webcam that is near eye level. There's also apps that will make your phone into a webcam. Think about lighting, have front-facing light. If you've got a lot of light behind you, you're going to be a dark shadow. People can't read your facial expressions as well. And think about your background. You might have a physical background, you might have a virtual background. Just make sure that it's not distracting, that there's not people moving in and out that don't need to be there. And then finally with presence, we're going to take a look at visuals. In a large face-to-face presentation, you should be the focus. We don't want your slides to be the presentation, because if your slides are the presentation, guess what? Just email them to me. I'll read them. I'll email you some questions if I have them. Why am I taking time to go to a live meeting when it's just going to be talking through a PowerPoint? So your visuals need to be the focus. Sorry, your visuals don't need to be the focus. You need to be the focus, or you should be the focus. Think about virtual cameras. I'm using Prezi Video to give these images and this text because I don't need to screen share. I want to stay a large figure on the screen without being a small thumbnail while my PowerPoint slides take over. I may also use some virtual backgrounds that are built into a lot of platforms to put my slides and my content there instead of me screen sharing all the time. Not that screen sharing is bad, but just remember, who's the focus? You or your visuals? You. The final point in this video today is follow-up. What should we do when a meeting is finished? Well, again, if we have a video, we may want to send that link whenever it's ready to the appropriate people. We may want to follow up with an email. Maybe we've edited the agenda, or we've added some ideas, or we have some other files, some other PDFs or video links, send those to people. And especially if there's any actions that weren't on the agenda that came up during the meeting, maybe there's some dates and deadlines. Definitely email those out to the people, especially if they're specific to individuals. Send them an individual email and you'll probably get a better follow-up response. So, objectives, agendas, attendees, interacting, presence, and follow-up. All of these things take a little bit of work and a little bit of time, but it will make your meetings more productive and it will make your attendees more productive and happier. Meetings, organizing meetings, running these meetings does take effort, it does take practice, but we eventually get used to it. If we want better communication, if we want better persuasion, if we want better team results, if we want to save time and we want to save money, meetings are a way to make that happen. You might say, well, other people don't have meetings as good as mine, but isn't the goal to be better than all of those other people?